and welcome back to another episode of The Male Perspective. I am your host, Lana Reid, and today, on this day, I have with me a gentleman by the name of Andrew Adeniyi. He is the CEO and founder of ASA Solutions, a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm based out of the greater Indianapolis, Indiana area, and the author of the book, let's keep my fingers crossed that I get this right, author of the book, Circle of Leadership. I knew I wasn't going to get it right.
You got it.
Circle of Leadership, creating and leveraging culture, right? Did I get it right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
You got it.
Woo-hoo. Just 53 years. I was sitting up there before. I was like, okay. And so we're going to spend some time talking about creating a healthy work environment. A lot of people are concerned about that when they're looking for jobs. A lot of companies are looking for that when they're creating these environments. So I'm looking forward to picking your brain today. But first and foremost, as I always do, I take a quick moment to pause. So thank you to you for making time for me today. Time is a gift. Once we give it, we can't get it back. So, sir, I appreciate you so much for making time to sit down and chat with me. With that, welcome to the show.
No problem. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So let me jump right in because I have a short amount of time. I was reading your bio as I was getting prepared for today, and I see you and I have similar work backgrounds all throughout high school and college. I worked in like retail customer service jobs, one in low level and sometimes in management. And one of the things I've come to understand is leadership is a servant position, and the whole energy atmosphere of the work environment kind of is a trickle top down thing. It flows from the leader down. And when it's bad, it's bad. You hear everybody at the water cooler, at the break room, like, we don't know how so-and-so got to be a manager. So as I start, I want to ask you, when a company or organization is looking to hire a leader or manager or somebody to kind of carry out the core values and of the company, when all you have are resumes and the interview process, where let's face it, they're on their best behavior. How do you kind of navigate and kind of start to pick out somebody who's going to be a good fit for your company?
Yeah, we just went through a time, coined the Great Resignation, right? Or the Great Reshuffle. I saw a lot of different terminology and talked a lot about the challenges that are posed to kind of the talent atmosphere out right now. So I think it's a really good question. A couple of things come to mind. Number one, I don't think people do a very good job interviewing. So, and even a step before, from a job description standpoint, a lot of times it's not super clear. There can be verbiage in there that can discourage some groups from even applying in the first place. So there's a lot of bias that can be built into the job description process itself and then the screening process. So I think companies have to take a very firm look at what's in the job description, what is truly mandatory for success in the role, and what is just a nice to have, and what do you need to put in, what do you not need to put in there. When it comes down to actually interviewing candidates, I always recommend use a interview panel, and it should be a diverse panel as well. And you want that panel to be diverse to ensure that you minimize the bias that may occur as you're evaluating candidates. So it gives you a good opportunity to be able to have a team internally to connect and discuss and say, what'd you capture in your notes? This is what I saw. And I find that that's a very valuable way to approach interviewing to ensure that bias doesn't creep in as much as it could if it's an individual. You also want to have a structured interview process. Sounds simple. You'd be surprised how many small businesses don't have a go-to set of questions that they ask the same questions to every candidate. And that in itself can create bias and make it difficult for people to be able to join the organization. So those are some very practical things that I think even shoot organizations in the foot before they even get to the point of trying to offer someone a job and foster a good culture.
Okay. Now you mentioned having like a structured set of questions. Are there legal parameters around what you can and cannot ask a potential interview candidate?
There are, and I do not have a law degree, so I don't want to give law advice, but there are some things that you're not supposed to ask, things around age, things around, or even things that could help disclose age. So, clarity around when you went to college or when did you graduate high school? Any of those types of things that can reveal age is not something you're supposed to ask. Also, from a salary perspective, I think that's a common one that historically I think may have been asked, but you're not allowed to do that, and a lot of states are embracing that as well, where you're not supposed to ask what somebody made at a previous job, because that then can influence you to say, oh, they may not be a good fit for this director role that we're interviewing for because their salary is way less. Well, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't correlate, right? So people can get discriminated against from even sharing things like that. But there are some good things that are coming into place now in terms of just salary ranges being listed in job descriptions and that becoming the norm. I think that's a great way to promote transparency along the way as well. But I would always say consult with a lawyer if you're in the HR world to ensure that you know exactly what to ask and what not to ask.
Gotcha. Okay, good tips. Now, let me kind of continue on with creating a work culture, which leadership is supposed to be able to do. And I'm wondering why certain companies nail it and other companies fail miserably. And I'm thinking of like Chick-fil-A. A customer can go anywhere throughout the country and get the same experience, which lets you know that the staff at these establishments understand the company's core values and vision, right? But you can go to McDonald's or Burger King in different areas, sometimes down the block from each other, and get a very different experience. And you're kind of scratching your head like, do these employees work for the same company? Do these employees have the same shared value and vision? So how come some companies are good at nailing the whole widespread company culture and vision, and some companies just don't get it?
Great question. The answer is intentionality.
Okay.
Or lack thereof, right? The reason I wrote my book is because I used to work for an international retailer, and the division I worked for was one of the best in the country, top 3 out of 24 divisions. First job out of college, I just assumed everyone had a great work environment like I was experiencing. Then I had a promotion opportunity to go to the East Coast and work for one of the worst divisions in the company. And when I got there, it felt like a completely different company. And I remember asking myself, how can 2 divisions in the same company, same pay, same access to resources, same training curriculum, same everything, how can they be so drastically different? And the answer is culture and leadership. That's the difference. In the environment that I started at in Indiana, that VP who led that division, she was the type of person who would be intentional with writing down birthdays, significant other names, right? Anniversaries, some of those little details that don't show up in the inbox, don't show up on the balance sheet, not in a profit and loss statement. That's what she would do. And I remember riding in the car with her during my training process. We'd get to a store, she'd open up her notebook and she'd go back to the last time she was at the store and remember, okay, the store manager, Jerry, was celebrating his 6-year wedding anniversary last time I was here. That means it's, he's approaching 7. When I see him, I'm going to mention that. So now you have this VP walking into the store. Hey, Jerry, how's it going? How's your wife doing? Happy anniversary. He's thinking, man, you haven't even seen me in a year. My direct leader hasn't even mentioned my anniversary. And here, this person 3-4 levels above me remembered it. And all it took was 30 seconds for her to jot down the note last time she was there and then be intentional enough to reference that before walking in, knowing that that is what's going to motivate and inspire that individual. Not anything else that she could do. So that's what would take place, right? It's intentionality versus when I went to the East Coast, that leader there, he couldn't tell you what district you were in. He couldn't tell you any information about your family, just completely disconnected and led from a standpoint of fear. And a lot of leaders do that, right? Whereas the leader in Indiana, you didn't want to let her down. You would work overtime to ensure you didn't let her down. On the East Coast, it was all fear-based. Do this or else. Your job's on the line. So it comes down to intentionality.
Okay, intentionality. So, but I mean, us being human beings, and I guess going back to my original question, how do you pick managers, leaders across the board? Is that a training process, or just we just got to pick somebody who has that innate?
Yes, there's a few things that need to occur first. So in my book, The Circle of Leadership, I talk about the 3 P's of culture. It's purpose, people, process, and it's in that order. Number 1 is purpose. You have to know your purpose And then you have to work to operationalize that purpose.
Okay.
In an organizational context, that's vision, that's mission, that's core values, right? We're not just talking about things you plaster on the wall, but then you don't live it, right? We're not talking about stuff that gets buried in the handbook, but if you poll the average person at the company, they would tell you that their leader doesn't abide by those values in the handbook. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, this is why we exist. It's so important. We're going to hire based on these principles. We're going to fire if you do not meet these principles.
Gotcha.
And you're going to be incentivized and rewarded based on your ability to adhere and live throughout the purpose of the organization.
Gotcha.
That is step one, right? And companies miss that all the time.
Gotcha.
So number one, how do you have a compelling vision that you over articulate to ensure people understand it, and more importantly, know how to operationalize on a day-to-day basis? Then when it comes to people, it's a lot easier to interview. Because if you know simplicity and growth are two of your three core values, then you shouldn't be bringing anybody on the team who's not passionate or can't align with those values.
Okay.
But if those values aren't that important to you, or even worse, you don't even know them, how are you truly making the best decision for a fit in your organization if the people aren't in alignment with your purpose?
Okay.
So that's what helps the people perspective. And you have to prioritize your people through taking care of them and letting them know you are more important than profit, because you're what's going to allow us to be able to be profitable, right? And then the last component is process. This is typically where leaders and organizations who want to correct culture will start. They'll think about processes, and maybe we'll give this benefit, maybe we'll do these things. Meanwhile, they haven't even clearly articulated to their team why the organization exists and why the work that that person does matters, and to whom it matters to. That whole component is missing, but we want to talk about more surface level things in the process stage. That's the third bucket that I talk about in my book, because purpose has to be there first. Then you get the right person on the team in the right spot. And then you start talking about ways to simplify processes, to improve your training and development, to delegate, to hold people accountable, et cetera.
Gotcha. In your time in this industry, have you found it easier to implement things and retrain a person who's not really healthy for work culture, or do we just have to start all over and do this again? I mean, I'm thinking about the manager that you mentioned, where he wasn't getting it. He wasn't as personable. He wasn't as intentional. That was the word you used. Intentional as the other manager. Is it easy to get him up to par, I guess, is the thing with retraining and stuff like that? Or do we just have to start all over?
Is it easy? No, but nothing worth doing is, right? So it's one of those things where someone has to see the value in it. If they don't see the value in it, they're not going to invest what it takes to change it. It's one of the reasons culture is so difficult for leaders to execute on a high level, is because it's an intangible, right? If they don't do that, it's not super clear on paper, right, or on any financial report that that's the reason. But when you peel back the layers of the onion, you realize, oh, you don't foster an environment where your employees feel safe to collaborate and share ideas. That's actually why you're not innovating and you're not being able to foster great teamwork and get good results. It's easier for leaders to mask that and to deprioritize that over other things that are more tangible. Okay. Right. So I would say it's difficult. However, it starts at the top. Leaders have to see the value, and there has to be a sense of accountability and transparency around that as well. And training helps, but again, you have to go back to what's our purpose? Why are we here? And how do we ensure that people understand this is a non-negotiable? Okay. So much so to where if you can't align with the purpose of our organization, it's not a good fit.
Okay. So how do you, because you mentioned accountability, when we're trying to get everybody on board and on the same page, and an example that you gave with your own personal history of going to the Eastern Division, how do we now hold managers accountable so we can get everybody on the same page? Are there steps, tools, or things that we do?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Number one, you have to have a culture where you value feedback, you consistently ask for feedback, and then you take action based on the feedback. Those are some simple things that if you're a leader trying to figure out, hey, I want to take my culture to the next level, you've got to get your feedback from your team, and then you have to take action on that feedback. That requires them to feel safe enough to actually be honest and transparent in giving the feedback as well, right? So there's a level of trust that has to be established to be able to even make that work. Another thing, even more practical thing that leaders can do is weave it within your performance evaluations, right? So I used to work for Starbucks, and great culture, read about it in case studies time and time again. Well, they have a system of activities that interact with each other that allow them to have such a strong brand presence, right? It's not just one thing they do. It's all these different pieces that come together that make them or allow them to have a competitive advantage. And one of the things they do in their performance evaluation is it's literally based on you achieving results and you living the mission and values of the organization. That's it. That's it. That's your performance evaluation. Tell me how you've been living the mission and the values of the organization, and talk to me about the goals you set to achieve results, what results you've achieved. Let's have a discussion about that process. So think about that. The conversation that a lot of times dictates raises, incentives, bonuses, promotions. What is it contingent upon? The mission and values. How many organizations miss the opportunity in such an important conversation to say, hey, above everything else, you living the mission and values is priority. Okay. Now, a lot of people tend to have this philosophy about jobs is I'm going to come here and do my 8 hours and go home. But from listening to you, it's bigger than that. It's broader than that. We want to hire managers who kind of eat, live, and breathe this whole company philosophy. So is there a separation? Or, I was just listening to you talk about Starbucks. We really have to embrace this whole thing, right? Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, leaders need to take some ownership as well. If you have a team member who their perspective is, I'm going to come in, work my 8 hours and leave and I'm disengaged. Yeah, that might be the wrong fit for your organization, but also have you enabled them to have that viewpoint? Is that the norm within your organization? How are you motivating and inspiring that individual, right? What ownership are you taking with the fact that there's somebody on your team who has that perspective? Did you hire poorly in the beginning? Did you have a panel? Did you have structured questions? Did you take your time getting to know that individual? Do you even know them? Do you even know what motivates them? You'd be surprised how many leaders don't even know what motivates their direct reports. How can you get the best out of your team if you don't even know your person and your people well enough to know what levers to pull that actually motivate them? And that's a huge missed opportunity, especially when you think about weekly check-ins and things of that nature, those reoccurring meetings. Great opportunity to carve out the first 10 minutes and how are you doing? And not just saying it because you need to get to the next business item. Like, no, I'm actually clearing time off. I'll actually clear the whole agenda if needed for you to tell me about how you're doing. Gotcha. How many leaders are doing that? Not many. I'm reflecting back on a time where I worked for a big box retailer in management. And, we had a lot of the principles in place that you're mentioning, surveys or whatever, but the staff would just kind of grumble, like, I don't even know why we have to do this. Nobody's going to watch it. Nobody's going to pay attention to it. Nothing's going to change or whatever. So it didn't seem purposeful to the staff. So how do you make the whole evaluation process seem like the employee or the lower level staff is actually involved in the work culture? Because I think that's what happens a lot of times. A lot of people just feel like we're here and we're not heard. Yeah, absolutely. It's super important for leaders to take action, and not only take action based on the feedback, but over communicate. Okay. Right. So if you're going to administer a survey, send messaging out there to let them know the survey is coming, why the survey is coming, and what you plan to do with the information. Then you actually send the survey with communication, reminding them of the why and what you're trying to accomplish with it. Then after you've gotten the survey information, give them an update. Thank you so much for participating. We've got a total of 220 respondents. Overall, we're very excited about the results, but there are a few problem areas that we're going to dive into deeper. We'll share more information as we get that. Then, hey, we've begun the strategic planning process. Just want to fill you in on where we're at. These are the 3 things we've identified over the next 3 months. Leaders don't have that many touch points to let people know, hey, that feedback you took 6 months ago, we're still working on that. We still meet twice a month to work on implementing that feedback. And sometimes it's just sending that message out. And who sends it out is also important. I always recommend it's got to be the CEO or somebody who reports to the CEO. It has to be someone that high in the organization so they know, oh, they're actually looking at the responses of the survey and they're going to do something about it. Okay.
Got you. Good. Because I think that was something a lot of people miss, that it does take time, because a lot of times that might be causing some of the frustration. You want to see what you said happen immediately, and staff needs to understand it. It does take some time. So I like that point. I do like that point. Now, let me flip this for a second real quick, because I'm quickly running out of time here. Let's say you're the job applicant and you're in the process of doing the interview, and you're sitting on the job site of the location and you're having the interviews with the panel. What should you be looking for to say, hey, this is a good place I might want to work at, as a job applicant?
Yeah, I would say consistency in what you hear and what you see. Do people look happy? Do people mention the values of the organization? Do people talk about the culture? Do people want to communicate with you certain things that really resonate to them about why they work there? Or is everyone's perspective so drastically different, it's hard to get a pulse on what things are truly like, right? I would say that's the big thing. It's the culture. Workplace culture is the most important. You can have a lot of pay, you can have great benefits, but if you get to work each day and you're not respected, you don't feel valued, you don't feel seen, you don't feel heard, that is going to be more detrimental to you personally and professionally if you opt. And I can say that from experience. I've done that. I've taken the high paying job and no, I'll work it out. And I realize at the end of the day, it's more about money. It's not all about money. There's more to it than money, and workplace culture and how you feel when you get to work is important. So asking the people their sentiments on it and seeing what theme you see across those people would be one of the main things I would encourage someone to do.
Okay. Now, I want to move real quick because I've already taken up more time than I thought I would on that. But I want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which your consulting firm specializes in. And a lot of times I've seen with diversity, equity, and inclusion, some companies don't do it right. And I'm thinking of a Netflix series that I watched quite a while ago about Abercrombie and Fitch, The Rise and Fall, where they were having a lot of problems or lawsuits because they had a habit of hiring a certain racial I'm trying to be politically correct here, person to work for them and model their clothes and stuff like that. So they kept on getting these lawsuits, and they, as a result, they had to hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion person, and still were screwing the whole thing up, and because they were headbutting with the CEO. So how do you hire the diversity, equity, and inclusion person, or you create the department? What are the checks and balances a company organization can put in place to make sure that the department or person is actually hitting the mark and doing what it's supposed to be doing?
Resources and commitment come to mind. To have 1,000-person organization, you hire this chief DEI officer and okay, we're in good shape now. No, there's speakers involved, there's training involved, there's the building out of the team involved, there's the celebration of events and things of that nature. There's a lot that is needed to actually create change that's going to permeate throughout the entire organization. So you have to have a budget. Okay. So many organizations that I speak with, they don't even have a budget for DEI. So that, you put money behind what's important to you, right? So the number one, I would say, get somebody and then support that person through financial means, resources, et cetera. But then there's also, there has to be commitment and buy-in as well. And it starts from the top. The CEO has to look at that person as
Mm.
somebody who can contribute a considerable amount of value to the organization overall. And they don't view DEI as a separate thing that's over there in the corner. No, DEI has to be woven within all functions of the business.
Gotcha.
And if you have a leader who approaches it through that lens, you're going to be in good shape.
Okay, good. Now, a lot of times we're living in very tricky times today where everybody's perception is their perception and we have to honor what their perception is. So you might have a DEI department that's hitting the mark. They're doing what they are supposed to be doing above and beyond, but you have employee staff within the company who might feel slighted at some decisions. So let's say you hire somebody who's justifiably qualified for the position, but you have Roger, who's been sitting in sales for the last 20 years, and I'm an older person, so I'm slighted. Or you might have somebody with certain disability who feels slighted. How do you protect yourself within the company when you do actually have a very efficient, effective DEI team? Because people are going to feel some type of way anyways, right? Is there a way to kind of insulate yourself or no?
Well, number one, just understanding somebody's always liable to feel some type of way.
Okay.
Right. You can't get everyone in the organization to be 100% okay with every decision that's made. But what you can do is be very intentional with articulating the why behind everything you do. You can be very intentional with soliciting the feedback of everyone within the organization to ensure that they feel heard. And you can be intentional with over communicating not only the why, but where you're at in the roadmap, what you need from them, and why it matters to them along the journey. That way, at the end of the day, if somebody feels slighted for whatever reason, at least they know, okay, well, I know why we're doing what we're doing, right? And I feel like I was heard. I felt like they took my thoughts into consideration. They may not have gone the direction I would like, but I was heard, and they continue to communicate with me updates and what they're trying to accomplish. Somebody's going to take that better than somebody who doesn't have a lot of information. Processes are not crystal clear. They don't feel like they've been heard or seen. Those are two different ways to handle the same exact situation.
Okay. All right. Because sometimes you've seen situations where people get promotions or raises, and then their work environment, because people feel slighted, now they don't want to work with them, or they don't want to produce the best quality work. But like you said, if you just have some explanations and stuff like that, a lot of that is kind of fizzled out. So I can see that. Okay, that's good.
There's also clarity around processes too.
Okay.
A lot of organizations don't have a clear, this is a career progression within our organization. These are some of the opportunities that exist within our organization. This is what it takes to be promoted. People don't spell that out. So what happens is you have Roger who sees Adam, who reminds him of himself, and now he takes him under his wing, gives him mentorship, sponsorship, et cetera. And now that person gets tapped on the shoulder for the next promotion. And the other person, who's from an underserved community, didn't get that same exposure or access, bias crept in, and now they feel slighted, right? So that's also a way that can happen, where you don't have clarity in terms of what do I need to do to get promoted? And how do I ensure that as a leader, I'm giving people feedback constantly to where they should never be surprised about where they're at. Yeah, you didn't get the role because we've been talking about you working on emotional intelligence and we haven't accomplished the goals that we talked about, right? So there shouldn't be any surprise you didn't get it versus no feedback. So now they're thinking, oh, I'm crushing it because I haven't heard anything. And their leader's like, no, you got a lot of work to do. It comes down to clarity and communication.
And that's, I guess that goes back to your scheduled regularly performance evaluations. These things should be gone over with you. This is, if this is the direction that you want to go, this is the growth that you want to go, these are the steps and things that you have to put in place. That should be part of the performance evaluation process.
Yeah, and I think leaders should just view performance evaluation as a growth discussion.
Okay.
It's a growth touch base, a growth check-in, essentially, right? If you think about most of the reason why somebody will leave a company, you always hear about the leader. There's an issue with the leader, so I left. At the end of the day, though, they feel like they don't have an opportunity to grow. And why do they look elsewhere? For an opportunity to grow. So how can you be intentional in your organization with creating those opportunities right there? And that happens by every time you have a check-in, we're going to talk about your growth. Where do you want to be in 6 months? Where do you want to be in 2 years? What goals do you have in place? And now our conversations are all centered around what you need to do to accomplish the goals that we agreed on. And how can I support you as your leader? That's really how the performance conversation should go, because then you can say, hey, we agreed on these goals. These were the things you needed to do to get there. You dropped the mark on this item, right? Let's talk about that. But it's still bundled under the umbrella of you growing and me supporting you to grow.
Gotcha. Now, we've been talking a lot about like larger corporations most of the day, but I'm wondering about a smaller business owner, entrepreneur who's possibly growing and they're looking to hire some staff. When should they start looking for AA Solutions to kind of step in and say, hey, I need to make sure I have everything in place to develop a work culture and a proper DEI strategy? What portion of that should we start looking for somebody like you and your services?
I think you should start thinking about it immediately in terms of weaving DEI into everything that you do. In terms of getting support from an outside consultant, it depends. If it's training, we can provide training to an organization of any size. When it comes to consulting, you get the most impact when it's at least 50 to 100 people in the organization, just based on the investment it takes. And at the end of the day, we're talking about people and people interacting with each other. And that seems to be the headcount minimum that I would say makes sense to try to really invest in DEI from a consulting perspective. But from a training perspective, you can do that now. You can be a team of 2 and need to understand, what does DEI even mean and why does this matter in the workplace? Let's talk about that, right? So that would be my response to that question.
Okay, awesome. So what is let me see here how I want to word this. A lot of times companies nail the diversity part. They go to it and they say, they can look around the work. We have a very diverse workforce here, and we're so proud of ourselves. But a lot of times the people that they have are like, I'm still miserable because I feel stuck at this desk. I feel stuck at this thing, so they're missing the mark on the other stuff. So how do companies ensure that not only do they hit the D, but they hit the E and they hit the I? And you've kind of covered that. But just before I close off, I want to make sure everybody understands, how do you make sure you cover all of those areas?
Well, number one, you have to understand, what is your why? Are you trying to check the box, or do you truly believe DEI is good for business? Check yourself and figure that out, senior leader and senior leadership team, right? You got to understand that first. When you talk about DEI, if you do DEI well, what happens is you have a culture where you embrace diversity of thought and you foster a culture of belonging. That's what it leads to. And that's why the case studies continue to show diverse teams outperform other teams, right? So it's not just racial, ethnicity, gender diversity, right? It's diversity of thought. Do you have people who think differently at the decision-making table, right? That is what we're trying to accomplish. So to your point, you may have checked the box on racial and gender diversity. Does that mean you're fostering an inclusive environment where people feel comfortable actually leveraging their diverse way of thinking at the decision-making table? Or do they not feel safe enough to go against the grain and actually voice their true opinion because you just really want a diversity to check the box, not because you want somebody to challenge your way of thinking or to try to encourage the group to go a different way? So it's a mindset shift that has to happen around what you're trying to accomplish with diversity and what matters there. When you talk about equity, it's all about fairness. It's all about access to resources. It's all about custom tools and resources that help your team win. As the leader, your job is to help your people do their best work, right? So if there's an obstacle, a barrier getting in their way of being their most productive, their most satisfied, that's your job as a leader, to try to remove those obstacles. That's all equity is. That's all making the workplace equitable, really is, at the end of the day. When you talk about inclusion, we talked about that. It's mostly psychological safety. It's ensuring that people not only feel like I'm here to sit in this desk, but that when I share something, I'm going to be heard, I'm going to be valued, I'm going to be respected. They may not go with my decision, but they're going to hear me out and they're going to think about every word that I say before they make a decision. That's inclusion.
That's a wonderful recap. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Well, sir, I'm going to ask you my random question, and then I'm going to ask you to tell us how we connect with you. Do you consult for businesses outside of Indianapolis or no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then how we pick up the book. So I'll ask you that. But let me ask this random question here. Well, you might need to do it. How often do you look at your phone every day? You're a businessman, so this is probably
I would be embarrassed to share the real number. Too much.
Too much.
way too much.
Well, so
dozens of times in an hour, I'm sure.
In an hour, okay.
An hour, it's bad.
You would be lost without your phone, huh?
I would, unfortunately.
Well, tell us how we pick up the book and how we connect with you for some more information on DEI and creating the best work culture that we can.
Yeah, so the fastest way for you to get the book is through Amazon. Just type The Circle of Leadership, and my book should be the first one that pops up. You can get on Amazon. If you'd like to get a signed copy, take a little bit longer, but more than happy to do that. You can go to my personal website, andrewadeniyi.com, and you can purchase a signed copy of the book through that medium. The best way to contact me is going to be through LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Okay. Check it multiple times per day. So that's usually a good starting point. And then from there, we can exchange resources or emails and kind of go from there.
Awesome. So you're on LinkedIn from your cell phone all day, every day, huh?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, sir, I thank you for your time. It's just wonderful work. I have been in the workforce for many years, so I've seen the transition, and it's wonderful that we are here now and we're growing and creating diverse work environments, because I remember when it wasn't that way. So I'm glad to see us here now and seeing the work that you're doing. And much success to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
I appreciate you. That's all for this week's episode of The Male Perspective. I'm your host, Lana Reid, and I will see everybody next time.